This is how your Phase 2 Watts link arrives via FedEx, UPS, or the mail. Open it up and we'll take a look at what's inside before we gather the tools. First thing you'll find is you have the instructions, your decals, business card. Set that aside, we'll get to that in a minute. You've got the packing for the frame itself. Pull that out, set that aside. Open up the bubble wrap that protects the watch link. In this case, you've ordered a red. So we'll take that out, set that on the work table. Set the packing material aside. Inside the big box, you'll find a small white box that has your parts and pieces. You put the big box on the floor. And then you notice that right attached to the top of the white box is a parts list with the check off of all the parts and pieces that are included and assurance that everything is there. So now we'll take and open this box. Get a box opener, cut the tape. Be sure you don't go too far in. We don't want to cut into any of the parts and pieces that are inside. See, you've got the two hex bars with the rod ends attached to them. The rod ends are not in the correct position. We just attach them when shipping to make sure that our threads are good both on the hex bar and the rod ends. You've got a short axle clamp. You've got a long axle clamp. You've got your propeller with parts and pieces. Now we'll unwrap the parts and pieces and we'll lay them out on the table. Okay, this is how all your parts and pieces will look once you take them out of the bubble wrap. You've got the long axle clamp, which will go on the passenger side. You've got the short one, which will go on the driver's side. You've got your two 9-inch hex bars with rod ends. We have the propeller assembly, and in the small plastic bag you'll have some nylock nuts, which must be used for final assembly. Do not use the nuts that come with the propeller assembly. These are not nylocks. We want you to use the nylocks that are in here. Use these only for setting up the suspension settings and getting everything correct. So this is how you'll find everything once you unwrap it. You have your instructions and your parts and pieces list. Go over that and compare that with the parts and pieces. Okay, we have our tools laid out on the table that we're going to use. We're going to use a couple of ratchets, depending on your sockets, a 3/4 drive or a 3/8 drive, a 1/2 inch drive, whatever you want, a couple of extensions. We have a handful of sockets. We'll have a 1 1/4 inch, 1 1/8 inch, 1 1/16. We have a 3/4 and a 9/16. We'll want an 18 millimeter and a 13 millimeter. We have a rubber mallet. We may need an adjustable wrench. You'll want a 1 1/4 wrench, 1 1/8 wrench, 1 1/16 wrench, an 18 millimeter, a 15 millimeter, and a 9/16. You'll also need a torque wrench. Probably be a good idea to have a breaker bar, because sometimes things can get a little tight after they've been on there for a few years. The important thing is you want to make sure you get your digital level. It's going to be the easiest way to set your bars. You can use a level with a needle like this. These digital ones work a lot better. They're not that much money at Sears, or you can borrow one from a shop or a friend, and the all-important blue Loctite. With these tools, you should be able to take off the parts that you need to take off and assemble everything you need to assemble. All right, we've got the car up on the rack, and we're going to start taking off the panhard bar. You can see on this particular car, it's a 2014 GT. The customers had some previous work done on it. They've added some aftermarket coil springs, some aftermarket shocks. We've got an adjustable panhard bar. which is an upgrade, but certainly not at the level of the Watts Link. It has a aftermarket diff cover. This happens to be a Ford product. It has some relocating brackets. Lower control arms have been upgraded, and I'm sure if we could see it with the camera, we'd see that it has an upper third link that's been relocated. So we'll start taking this off, and then when we come back, we will show you how to start installing the Watts frame itself. We're going to start on the passenger side of this car. We're going to take the two bolts off that hold the panhard bar and the panhard bar brace off. We'll start with the bolt that holds the panhard bar itself on. We'll take the nut off on this side. Just these particular bolts have a bracket on the back that holds the nut, so you don't have to worry about putting a wrench on the back side. And we'll take this off, and then we'll go up here and we'll loosen this nut, and it has the same thing. You can see it has a little tab on here on the back side, so we don't have to hold a wrench on either side, just on the side we're working on. And we'll take this off, and we'll get the other side, and we'll come back when we have this part completely off. Remember to save these bolts. We're going to reuse them. After you take them off, clean them up, and we'll be putting some blue Loctite on them. So we'll be back in a minute. We've got the Watts Link frame inserted up into the Mustang frame. We slid it up in here first, put the lower bolt in from the front, from the back to the front, and then on the top bolt here, the factory puts it from the front side to the back side. It makes our installation easier if we put this in again from the back side to the front side. So we've got that part in. Then we're over to the driver's side. We've got two bolts up in there that we put in there, and we put Loctite on them. And show here. We make sure we put the Loctite on. And then we'll put that up in there, and you know what that looks like. You don't need a picture of it. Turn it in by hand, and we'll tighten that up with a 15 millimeter socket. Over here, we're going to take the Loctite, and we'll put some on the nut. Again, I can't emphasize how important the blue Loctite is. It allows you to take it apart, but it certainly keeps it from vibrating. So we'll put the nut on the top bolt, and then this here contraption that Ford makes with a little lever on it so it can tighten itself. We'll put the Loctite in there, and we'll put that on the back side, and then we'll take our wrench and tighten that up, and then we'll come back in a bit.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Okay, on this particular installation, this particular sway bar, we needed to take the upper bolt out of the sway bar link on both sides in order for this lower bolt to clear when we pulled it out. So depending, you may have an aftermarket sway bar that mounts a little bit differently or has a little bit different configuration on the link, but in most cases you're going to have to take out the bolt on either side, let the sway bar drop down so you can get these bolts out of there. On the driver's side, you'll put two factory bolts back in through the Watts Link frame into the Mustang frame. On this side, it's very important that you do not over torque these. It's a small thread, it's a small bolt, and if you strip that out in the frame, you're going to have some issues, and they're going to take a little bit longer. So you want to make sure you check the torque spec on this. Do not over torque it. Just snug it up is all you need. You're going to have blue Loctite on it, so it will stay where you put it until you want to take it off. So snug them up according to the factory torque spec, and be careful not to over torque this area. Okay, when you put your axle clamps on, before you do that, you want to make sure that your axle tubes are clean. This is a fairly new car, hasn't got a lot of miles on it, so there's no scale, but there is some dirt, and we'll want to make sure we clean that off. If your car's got a few miles or it's driven up in the North Country where you get some salt, you'll probably have some scale on there. Make sure you clean that off with some sandpaper and make sure the axle tube is nice and smooth so that the axle clamps fit around it. All right, we're going to put the driver's side axle clamp up. I usually put the bolts in there and put it on the clamp before I slide it up there. And then we'll slide the other half of it onto the bolts. And then before you put the blue Loctite on, just put the nuts on there. Don't tighten them up, just put them on there to hold everything in place so the two halves don't come apart. Just spin them on, and we'll put the blue Loctite on later. But that's done. That's in relative accurate position where it's going to be. Then we'll take the other side and we'll go put this one on. If you have an 05 Mustang, you'll definitely want to use this axle clamp half on the passenger side. Later on in the production run of the S197s, Ford started putting the axle breather vent, which was up here, and what this is made to go around, they started putting that on the driver's side. Because they put it close to the differential housing on the driver's side, you won't need this on the driver's side, and it doesn't matter what position it goes on the passenger side now, because it's just not a necessary application. But we'll put this axle clamp up, and we'll slide the axle clamp half on it, and we'll put the bolts on like we did on the other side. And we'll be back to putting the hex bars with the rod ends on it. We've set up the hex bars and the rod ends in this picture, and you use the bolts as explained in the instructions. You put a bolt through these ends of the rod ends, you put a bolt through this end, and the goal is to get the bolts as parallel as possible so you can get basically the hex bars and the rod ends exactly the same length. Now, because of manufacturing variances, etc., it may be that if this is just a little bit off and you turn the rod end in, then it's going to be off to this angle. If you turn it back 180, it's going to go be this angle. So find a happy medium, and then we'll snug them up with a wrench, and not 100% tight, but enough that they don't change, and we'll go over to the car and put them on.
It's refreshment time, and our refreshment stand is loaded with good things to eat. There's crispy, crunchy popcorn, and hot, delicious buttered popcorn, lots of candy, and frosty, refreshing cold drinks.
Okay, in the instructions, it tells you to put about 6 to 7 threads showing on one end and 2 to 4 on the other end. So in this particular application, we've got 6 threads showing here. We've got 4 on this end, which will be the axle clamp. One of the questions I often get is, how do you get those darn O-rings onto the propeller? Well, here's the trick. You take your O-ring, you slide it over the ear of the propeller, like so. You slide the other one over, like so. Then you slide the rod end into the propeller, and keep in mind it's a pretty good fit, so you're going to have to play with it a little bit. Make sure you have the propeller in the right position, front to back. And then on this particular application, because we have a diff cover, we're going to put the bolt for the propeller. I'm going to put that facing head to the front of the car, threads to the back of the car. So we'll put that bolt in there like so. And then what we do is we bring this O-ring up over the top and slide it with a little bit of force right over the top, like so. That one's in place. And then what we're going to do we're going to do the same thing on this side. Before I do that, because I had a little bit of an issue, I'm going to put a nut on there to secure that. Another thing I get calls on is, well, the ball doesn't fit into the propeller, it's not machined right, etc., etc. They're exactly a tight fit. It's not really an interference fit, but just a perfect fit. So take your time, align the ball so it slides in there perfectly, and it will fit. I've done it a million times, so don't get upset if it doesn't go in the first time. Then slide the bolt in. And what I've also done here is to keep everything in place, I've put a conventional nut, the one that was shipped with, not the nylock nut, on there to hold it. Now I'll slip the O-ring over the top. Okay, we've removed the two assembly nuts from the short 3/4 bolts. These are 3/4 by 16 by 1 5/8, by the way, for your reference. We've taken those off. We started the nylock. We're going to put a little bit of blue Loctite on there, make sure they stay even though they're nylock nuts, and we'll start tightening that up. Okay, we're finally tightening up the 3/4 16 bolts on the propeller. According to the instructions, it's asking for 100 foot-pounds, so tighten it up to where you think you're getting close to 100. Put the blue Loctite on it. Get it pretty close on there. Okay, then we'll hook up the torque wrench. We've got it set to 100, and we'll tighten that up until we get a click. There's another question I often get as far as when do we tighten up the bolts completely on the axle clamps. I like to snug them up so that I can still move it back and forth on the axle around, so when I do my final adjustments I still have some flexibility in there and don't have to be pounded on it. If you get it too tight, you can always tap it with the rubber mallet, but just snug it up so that it stays in place, but you can still do a little bit of adjustment on it. In this step, we're positioning where the propeller will go on the Watts frame. We've installed a bolt through the rod end and through the axle, into the axle clamp on the driver's side. It's still loose, so we can move it around. We move it up to approximately 9 o'clock position when looking at it from the outside of the tire, or 3 o'clock, directly horizontal to the ground. And then we'll take a look at what we have as far as where the bolt will go through the Watts frame with the bars parallel. So you take a look at which hole you're going to be sticking the bolt through based on the ride height of your car. And it looks to me like on our car we'll be using 1, 2, 3, the 4th hole or the middle hole. So we'll start assembling it that way. Okay, in this installation, we're on a drive-on lift, so we needed to get the differential up in the air. And if you were on a 2-post lift and the suspension would hang down, we wouldn't have to do this. But in this particular case, since we're on a drive-on, what we want to do is we want to get the differential up in the air, because in this case, we have an aftermarket differential cover, and we want to put the bolt from the front of the car to the back of the car, so we have more clearance on the differential. So I've had questions about that also. Can you go to the front to the back or back to the front? If you have problems with clearance on the differential cover, put the bolt head on the front of the installation and put the nut on the back. Okay, we've got the temporary bolt, the non-nylock nut on the 3/4 10 bolt. We've tightened that up so it's not moving. And we're going to position the axle clamps so that the propeller at rest is approximately 1230 and 630. So we're just about there right now. If we move it over just a little bit, there we go. And that'll tell us exactly where we want to be. So now we'll put the bolt and washers and rubber O-rings on this axle clamp. And then the next thing we want to do is get our level and get everything plumb. We've gotten our angles pretty close to where we want them to be. So what I did is I tightened up this axle clamp, torqued it to the specifications, and then I also put a little yellow mark here with a little marking pen on the seam of the axle clamp and right where it meets the axle. So every time you change oil, you can kind of check and see if your axle clamps are staying in place. It's a good way to make sure everything is tightened up well. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to put the digital level on our bars and see how we're coming out. Right now, if I put this on here, I see that we have 2.1 degrees going down. We're going down towards the center, 2.1 degrees, which is 2.0, 2.1, which is pretty good compared to wanting it to be perfectly level. Very few times will you get it perfectly level just with the normal weight in the car. So we're at 2.0. That means we'll want to have this one 2.0 going downhill also, which means that we do take the level, we have to tap it down just a little bit. Now, some of you have wondered, what's the rubber mallet for? Well, in this case, we want to get the 2.0. So we'll take this, remember this side is not tightened up yet. We'll put the level on there. We got to go down just a little bit, so we'll take it and we'll tap it a little bit. And we're at 2.1, but when you adjust this one, it also affects this one. So we're going to go back over here and see what we have on this side. And this side is 2.2, and this side is 0.9, so we probably want to tap it up a little bit. And this is probably the touchiest thing for getting everything level. We got 2.4, and this is 2.3. Okay, now what we have to do is we have to tighten up the axle clamp, and we have to tighten it back and forth, because if you just tighten one side, it'll move it down. If you tighten the top, it'll move it up. So we got to do a little bit of snug it up on the top and the bottom, and we'll get that taken care of, and we'll come back and see what we have. Okay, for a final check of everything, we're going to tighten up these jam nuts so that we got these hex bars tight. I just tighten that up, and then since you can't get a torque wrench in here, we'll get on that with some serious force, and we should be able, most of you have put on enough tires at 90 pounds of torque that we should be able to guess just about what we're going to get at 100 pounds of torque right there. Get that torqued up. We'll do the same thing over here, and we'll tighten up the jam nuts. Now, a couple of things, we're going to bring the video down here and shine right up underneath here. When you tighten this up, you want to make sure that this rod end is parallel between the two pieces of the propeller. You see, you don't want it jammed over like that or that. It will be occasionally, but you want to tighten it up so it's like that. And then the same thing happens down here on this end, on this particular one, because it's on an angle. You want to make sure that the rod end is perpendicular to the rod shaft, or the axle clamp right there in the bolt.
Captain's log supplemental.
Now we're going to do a little bit of a walk around here to make sure we've got everything taken care of and remind you what to do. We remember those two bolts right up underneath there that go into the frame. You don't want to tighten those too much. You don't want to strip them off. So take a look and see what the factory spec is on those. I'm sure we can look it up. In fact, I may have it on my website by the time this is posted. You come back around here, we got to make sure we've torqued this bolt here. All these bolts are torqued. Also notice that from our first video, we had this axle clamp flipped 180 based on how we wanted everything to turn out. We turned this around and our axle gusset is facing the outside on that. Same thing happened over here. We had to turn this around and our axle gusset on this one happens to be facing to the inside. that worked out fine. Either way, guts can go either way, whatever was for your application. Now you also get some small washers in the kit. These here, let me see if I can show you. These small bushings, people are wondering, what are they for? Well, I'll show you. If we come around on this particular application, we got our bars pretty close to parallel front to back. The hex bars, they're pretty well parallel. If they weren't, the one you'd want to adjust would most likely be this one here, and you would put those spacers in between the axle clamp and the washer for the rod end, and that would move this back and forth, which would move it in and out a little bit. You want to get that as close to equal from side to side as you can. I move the camera a little bit right there. You want to get that spacer right in there, and that would move this in and out, which would change the angle here, and that would help things stay in parallel. I think we're pretty good on this one here. Let's see, everything's tight. We've got our yellow marks to make sure that the axle clamps don't move. Looks like a nice installation. Time to take this car out and see just exactly how it handles. Any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call, 920-279-0875. Thank you for watching.